Hello there. In this video, we are going to multiply and divide integers. When you are multiplying or dividing integers, there are two possibilities. It's either your two integers will have different signs or they will have the same sign. So let's work through some examples over here, and from there, let summarize the rules when we are multiplying or dividing integers. What will happen to the sign of the product or the quotient? So let's get started. So first we have 6 times negative 4. So again, I'm going to translate this to English language. 6 times negative 4 means you have, let's use blue, you have 6 groups of negative 4. And we know that 6 groups of negative 4, that's just repeated multiplication. Repeated addition. So you have negative 4 plus negative 4 plus negative 4. I'm not going to write it down here, but you know what it is. When you have 6 groups of negative 4, so that means you have negative 24, right? Because if you do negative 4 and then you have 6 of that, you keep on adding it, you will end up with negative 24. Okay, the next one, negative 3 times 4. This one, we can't really apply the same strategy we used over here because you cannot have negative 3 groups. But we can switch these two by using the commutative property of multiplication. So we can rewrite this as 4 times negative 3. So now we have 4 groups of negative 3. And again, 4 groups of negative 3, that's just repeated addition. So you have negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3. So that means you're going to have negative 12. Okay. Number 3. So number 3 is just the same as this one now. You have 5 groups of negative 4. So again, that's just repeated addition. So I'm gonna write this out here. So negative 4 plus negative 4 plus negative 4 plus negative 4. How many we have now? 1, 2, 3, 4. Then plus negative 4. So all together, you have negative 20. And the last one, negative 7 times 0. Well, you don't even have to think about the sign of your product because every time you multiply any number by 0, the answer would be 0 because this means you have 0 group of negative 7. Well, that means nothing because you have no group at all. Okay, so that's how you do multiplying integers with different signs. The other case is when you have the same sign. Problem number 1, you know how to do this. You've been working with positive numbers ever since, and this is just 4 times 2, 4 groups of 2. So you know that equals 8. So that's positive 8. You don't have to write positive because when there's no sign right in front of your number, the default is positive. Okay, what if you are multiplying integers and they're both negative? How do you do that? Okay, before we do this problem, let me show something over here. Say I ask you, what is opposite of 5? Well, the opposite of 5 is negative 5, correct? Yeah. So that means, hey, this negative over here, that's just opposite of, right? Like the English translation of that negative is opposite of. Okay? So we will use that concept when we figure this out. Again, using the commutative property of multiplication, this negative 5, that's actually, you can rewrite that as negative 1 times 5, right? So negative 1 times 5, and then times negative 8. That's the same as negative 1 times 8. So I can rewrite this as negative 1. I'm going to pull out the negative 1 again, and then 5, and then 8. Okay, first I'm going to multiply the positive numbers here. So 5 times 8, that's 40. And then if I multiply this, negative 1 and then negative 1, if I multiply these two, negative 1 times 40, because I know how to do that. That means I have 40 groups of negative 1. So I'll continue over here. Negative 1 times 40, that would be negative 40. And then I still have the negative 1 here. But remember that negative 1, that's the same as just a negative like this. So negative 1 times negative 40, I'm actually figuring out the opposite of negative 40. What's the opposite of negative 40? That is positive 40, right? So negative 5 times negative 8 is positive 40, or just 40. Okay, so from here, let's summarize our rules. If you're multiplying two integers with the same sign, like case 2 over here, take a look at the sign of the product. This is positive, both positive, the product is positive, both negative, the product is still positive. And that's true always. When you're multiplying two integers with the same sign, so like a positive times a positive, the answer would be positive. Same thing, a negative times a negative, the answer would still be positive. Okay, so remember, same sign. Positive times positive is positive. Negative times a negative is positive. It doesn't matter what sign, as long as they're the same, it's gonna be positive. So you can use a smiley face to remember this. So positive times a positive, that means they're agreeing. They're choosing the same sign. They have the same sign. So that's a good thing. A happy face. Same thing when they're both negative, so they chose the same, they have the same sign, that's still a happy face. So same sign, happy face, that's positive. Okay, the other case is when you have different signs like this. Let's take a look. So this one, a positive times a negative, we got a negative. A negative times a positive, we still got a negative. A positive times a negative, it's still a negative. So from there, we can conclude that, hey, if I'm multiplying two integers with different signs, like negative times a positive, the answer would be negative. Or a positive times a negative, the answer would be negative. So remember that. When they have different signs, the answer is negative. So you can, I'm going to draw an emoji over here. So one is negative, one is positive. So different signs, they're not agreeing. That's a sad thing. It's a negative thing. Or it can look like this. One is a positive, the other is a negative. Still, they're not agreeing. It's a sad thing. So that's negative. Okay? So don't forget that. You have to memorize this. Okay. So let's just do some examples. Finding the quotient. So again, you will apply the same sign rules. So same sign, positive. Different signs, negative. So let's see. Negative divided by negative 36 divided by negative 3. So first you work out the signs. So negative divided by negative, well, that's the same sign. So your answer will be positive. and then you work on just the numbers. 36 divided by 3, so that is 12. So the answer is positive 12. Okay, this one, figure out the signs. So this is positive 42 because there's no sign. The default is positive. Positive 42 divided by negative 6. Well, one is positive, one is negative. They have different signs, so your quotient would be negative. And then you figure out the quotient of 42 and 6. So 42 divided by 6, that is 7. So the answer is negative 7. So same thing here. Figure out the sign. Negative divided by positive. So that's different sign. So your quotient will be negative. And then 35 divided by 7. That is 5. The last one. Again, figure out the sign. Negative divided by negative. That's the same sign. So the answer would be positive. And then figure out the quotient of 12 and 4. That is 3. Okay, so sometimes you'll be multiplying or dividing more than 2 integers. If that's the case, you would have to remember these 2 reminders. If there is an even number of negative signs, the answer is positive. So all you have to do is to count the number of factors with negative signs. If that number is even, the sign of your answer here would be positive. If the number of negative signs is odd, the answer is negative. So let's have an example here. So you have 3 integers here. So you're going to work from left to right. So first, let's figure out the sign. Let's count how many negatives we have. So this is a negative, so that's 1. And this is another negative, so that's 2. So we have 2 negatives. So that's even. So that means the sign of your answer here would be positive. So this would be positive. And then you're just going to work on the numbers alone without the sign. You're going to do it from left to right. So 45 divided by 3 is 15. And then divided by 5 is 3. So the answer for this is positive 3. Okay, for the next one, we have 3 integers, so let's figure out the number of negative signs. So let's see, this is positive, this is negative. Oh, we only have 1 negative. So 1, that's odd, so that means the answer would be negative. So my answer here would be negative. So now we just have to figure out the value of the number. You're going to do order of operations from left to right. So 9 times negative 12, that would be 120 is 10 minus 12, so 108. So this would be 108, and then divided by 4. 108 divided by 4, that would be 27. So this is negative 27. Okay? All right. The last one here. So again, figure out how many negatives you have. There's positive, negative, positive. So there's 1 negative. So that's 1 is odd. So that means the answer would be negative. So you're going to put here negative. Now, to figure out the number, you just have to work from left to right. Ignore the signs because we already figured out the sign. So you're going to do 15 times 3, that's 45, and then divided by 9. 45 divided by 9 is 5. So the answer for this is negative 5. So again, when you are working with 2 or more integers and you're multiplying and dividing them, you can just figure out first the sign of your answer depending on the number of your negative signs. If you have an even number, the answer would be positive, and if you have odd number of negative, the answer would be negative. Okay, so I hope you find this video helpful.